You know, I'm not a young man anymore. I'd like to win these fights before I'm gone. I'm Fred Kelly Grant. I've been a lawyer for 50 years. In the East, I prosecuted organized crime. In the West, I represented 2 governors in restraining arbitrary federal regulatory agencies. Today, I protect landowners, private businesses, citizens like you, against a government run amok. I've won against the federal government in California, Arizona, Utah, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. But today, from the San Juan Islands in the Great Northwest to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, through overregulation and executive orders, under the radar, the federal government is threatening the paper industry, the timber industry, energy industry, transportation, ranching and farming, and the seafood industry of the Chesapeake Bay. Help us take the fight to the government. Help us stand up for the American people. Help us fight the good fight. Help us put the EPA back in the box, the penalty box. I'm Fred Kelly Grant. Thank you. We've put together a team. It's a very exceptional team. One of the things that people have worried about for some time is the fact that I hadn't prepared anybody to keep going with this. And so an anonymous donor, anonymous to the public in New York City, who had no real dog in any of these fights except that she really abhors the idea of bureaucrats running the government, gave us a substantial amount to begin to put a team of attorneys together and paralegals, and we started the cases that you've seen here on this, and I'll explain a few of them to you, and that's what has made it possible for us to come to the city of Reading to help the city and your coordination committee take on Carb, the California Air Resources Board, with regard to probably the worst regulation that I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them over the last 25 years. The members of your coordination committee who have worked with the city, these folks have put together a tremendous program for us to take over and work with them. Let me tell you about, first of all, the city sent a letter on Friday to the California Air Resources Board that lists all the reasons why they have to follow the law and coordinate with the city. I've been here before. In fact, I think Erin Ryan figured I'd been here 6 times. I've been on her radio show 6 times. And I think I've been here each time and talked about coordination. It's one that Congress has mandated that the federal agencies, or any agency that deals in a major federal action, has to follow. And it means that they have to coordinate with the local government. They have to use every practicable means to make their policy consistent with that of the local government. Well, obviously, the policy of the city of Reading is not to require these filters, which are based on absolutely no sound science and without any consideration for the economic havoc and the social havoc that they will create. The letter that the city sent, and I'm sure that it's up on all kinds of websites by now so that you can see it and read it. If you read it, you'll find all the reasons that Carb has violated the law and all the reasons why they have to coordinate with the city. If they don't, they've violated the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution. They've violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. They've violated the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. And in so doing, they've violated your 10th Amendment rights under the Constitution. And those 10th Amendment rights, since I was here last, have been extended now even to individual citizens. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, and you think that's unusual? 9-0, decided for the first time in history that the 10th Amendment can be raised by individual citizens. It's something that many of us had preached for years, and the political scientists said, no, no. Of the people in the 10th Amendment didn't really mean of the people, to the people. It was just superfluous. And our argument was that the founders of the Constitution were not like today's Congress. They didn't write just to be writing. They didn't write 10,000-page bills. They meant every word that was in the document. And the Supreme Court finally affirmed that position that we had taken. So the city can raise the 10th Amendment in your behalf as individual citizens. And the city, in the position that it's taken to require Carb to coordinate, that action is not limited to just the residents of the city of Reading. Because if the city wins, and what the city has raised is an issue that affects every Californian throughout the state, Carb can't have it two ways. They can't have a regulation that violates all those rules and say, okay, in Reading we won't enforce it, but we will in the rest of the state. It doesn't work that way. So one of the questions that was asked on Saturday is, do you have to be a resident? Does this apply only to the residents of Reading? It does not. It applies to everybody in the state of California. But more than that, it applies to everybody in the United States of America, because I guarantee you this. We may not win. I know Gary doesn't like to hear me say that. We may not win. I can tell you that I haven't lost yet in one of these cases. But there will come a time when I do. But if we don't win, they'll know they've been in one hell of a fight. And it'll be so clear that they've been in a fight that I expect that the United States Congress will do something about it. Because one of the goals of this coordination effort is to come up with language that we can get in an appropriations bill that will prohibit the EPA from using any appropriation to assist the implementation of the Carb rule in California in any way, or to fund any implementation of the rule, which would mean no more funding for Carb from EPA. So from that standpoint, we will win. California, in this case, wrote the standard, and EPA adopted it. California led the race in this case. And you can be sure that the rest of the states are watching what happens here, because New York and Massachusetts and Maryland and Michigan and all the other liberal states up and down the East Coast and through the Midwest, all 12 cities that elected the last president, will be watching to see whether or not you succumb. Because if you do, the Carb regulation will become the regulation of every state. And EPA now has adopted it, and so they will force it. Today, the committee decided on a date to recommend for the scheduled public hearing that we'll hold. A public hearing as we've held in each of these cases. The purpose of that public hearing is to make a record of the economic damage that is done by this regulation, which the agency pays no attention to. The social damage that will occur as a result of the economic damage, because when a trucker goes out of business, for example, it isn't just the trucker that's impacted, it's the barber that cut his hair, it's the waitress that served him coffee, it's the school district where his children went. There's nothing that happens, there's nothing that Carb does or any other agency, there's nothing they do that doesn't affect the entire structure of your society. And that's the reason Senator Packwood put that local government rule in the statute in 1976 to make sure that the federal agencies couldn't run roughshod over local government, because it's at the local government level where you're served. I mean, you can find Gary Cadd in a supermarket or in a drugstore or on the street, and you can yell at him. But you can't find your senator on the street, and if you did, it wouldn't do any good because she wouldn't listen to you. Local government at that public hearing, with testimony, not just talk, but testimony, will prove many things. First of all, the economic damage. They'll also prove the lack of science, the lack of sound science to support this rule. We know that the science that has been used does not meet the standards of the Data Quality Act, which Congress has passed. It's not relevant, it's not objective, it's not timely, and it just plain ain't sound. It's just that simple. And we have experts to say that. We have a professor, a former professor from UCLA, who blew the whistle on a lot of these things and got in trouble for it. We have a lawyer who worked for EPA for 20 years and knows how these regulations are founded. And he will testify as to how they, first of all, decide what do they want to do, and then they write the regulation to do that, and then they go and try to find something to support the regulation. And it's that way in his testimony. It has been that way with every rule and regulation that he worked on in the 20 years that he was with EPA. We also will have an expert to testify that when you talk about a clean community, these agencies talk about a clean community from the standpoint of air quality. And so they come up with a regulation that will not really improve air quality, but it looks like it will. And they justify it on the basis that it's for the health of the community. The expert will testify that 40% of what goes into the health of a community is unemployment, poverty, stress. Those things cause a community to be unhealthy. And some of the counties in the nation where these departments of environmental quality call the cleanest communities, he rates as the most unhealthy. So instead of dealing truly with the public health, they deal with what they want to deal with. They don't want to deal with unemployment, and the rule that they've imposed to implement with regard to the filters and air quality will contribute to the unhealthy status of the community by creating more unemployment, by putting more stress on the citizens and more stress on your social and cultural system. We'll produce evidence as to each element of the human environment. If you were to read every document that Carb has issued, and I haven't, but I have read the ones they say are important, the human environment, that term is never used. When they wrote their first report as they started to write the regulation, they said that when they identified diesel as a toxic, there was no economic impact, so they didn't have to study the economic impact. Well, of course there was. It wasn't an impotent action. They knew when they listed it as a toxic, they knew exactly what would come. It had to be resolved. It had to be put out of existence. So of course there was going to be economic impact, but they didn't study it because they knew that the economic impact was going to outweigh any possible health benefit that they could claim. Now let me ask you this question. If Carb is really interested in climate warming, and if they're really interested in air quality, what have they contributed to air quality if they drive truckers out of California to Nevada or to some other state and they continue using these filters that they claim dirty the air? I know that you feel that Carb, that this may be a unique case and it may be so difficult that perhaps we will have more trouble with it than the other cases, and we might. But it isn't unique. This is going on all over the country. EPA has set out to destroy industry in rural America. Carb's rule is doing just that. The big companies that can afford to be in compliance are not going to be found mostly in Shasta County and in Northern California. They're going to be found mostly in the urban areas of Southern California. And so what have they accomplished with their rule? Do you think the air in Los Angeles is cleaner than the air here because they've changed filters on the big company trucks down there? They have a study out that shows that portions of Los Angeles are the cleanest communities and the healthiest communities in the state, with all those freeways going through there. You see, they'll do anything and say anything to support their position because, as the lawyer will tell us as a witness, they decide on the position, they decide what they want to happen, they decide how they can make it happen, and then they try to find something to justify it. And what we're going to do is penetrate to that they've tried to find to justify it and show that it doesn't justify it, that they have violated the Interstate Commerce Clause, the 10th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, due process of law, as well as the Data Quality Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Clean Air Act. And as such, they ought to pay the price, because I doubt that there's a citizen in this room tonight that could violate all of those statutes and still be considered in good standing in the state of California. So that's where we are. That's what we can make happen. After the public hearing, the record of that public hearing, which will then be not just position, not opinions, but testimony, admissible evidence, we will send to every member of the Appropriations Committee of the Congress. We'll ask Representative Simpson, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee of Appropriations for EPA, to submit language in the next appropriations bill that will prohibit any use of appropriations to assist implementation of the California rule or the EPA rule based on the California rule. And in that way, hopefully, we can bring a stop to it while all the cases work their way through the courts. In 1775, the Revolutionary War did not begin at Concord and Lexington. The first battle of the Revolution was between farmers and the redcoats in the rural farm country way outside of Boston. Concord and Lexington was an urban area. The very first fight came when the farmers refused to follow the stamp tax. And the redcoats went out, a brigade of them went out to enforce it, and the farmers met them on the highway with sticks and rocks and pitchforks. And rather than get into a shooting match of shooting down unarmed people, the British leader decided to retreat, and he did. So the first battle of the Revolution was won by rural people, armed with not a single weapon that would have been of effect against the British Army. That's where we've come today. That war started because of bureaucrats, not because of King George. He's a symbol. But the bureaucrats, the tax assessors, the port authorities, the customs officers, they were what caused the distress to the colonists. And we've come 360 degrees back to the same place. The bureaucrats are running this country, or so they think. And we have to change that. I promise you this, if the funding comes through that I can bring that whole team here, you'll know we've been here. Carb will know we've been here. And if we get just a little bit of luck, we'll win this thing right here in Reading instead of in D.C. in the Congress. But we will win somewhere.